They said she looked like a stray mutt, lost and pathetic up there. I heard it whispered right next to me, dripping with that kind of venom people use when they think they're clever and no one will call them out. The voice belonged to my mother-in-law, Barbara, and the words slid from her lips like they belonged to her, like cruelty was her native tongue. It stung in a way I can't even fully explain, but what cracked me open, what left me breathless, was Mark's reaction. My husband. He didn't chuckle awkwardly or try to brush off his mother's nasty comment. No. He laughed. That smug, satisfied kind of laugh people let out when they think they've landed the perfect insult. His voice wasn't loud, but it was just loud enough, measured and intentional, so the families sitting in the nearby rows could hear. She's just like her mother, he muttered with that bitter smirk he'd perfected over the years. Completely useless. And in that suffocating moment, as my face burned and my hands clenched into fists in my lap, it struck me like a punch to the chest. These weren't people who merely turned a blind eye to unkindness. No, they reveled in it. They drank it like champagne at a celebration. They fed off it. And I had willingly placed myself right in the middle of them. I had invited them into my life, into my daughter's life, thinking I could somehow keep us both safe by keeping the peace. But the truth is, the cost of that silence was written all over Sophie's trembling shoulders as she stood under those harsh lights. And maybe that's why I'm telling this story now in the most honest way I can, hoping it reaches someone who's been sitting in the same suffocating seat, swallowing the same bitter lies. Because sometimes when you share your truth, it creates a crack in someone else's darkness, a sliver of light. And if this story does that for you, or reminds you of someone you love, maybe you'll consider supporting this space, this corner of honesty we're building together. A simple, like a comment, or even subscribing, means the world not just for me, but for everyone who's ever felt small in rooms full of loud people. But let me back up, because maybe the picture isn't entirely clear yet. I'm Claire Walker. I'm 33, though most days I feel like I've aged twice that. I've been a stay-at-home mom for the better part of 8 years, and the little girl standing under those blinding, too harsh stage lights, that's Sophie, my daughter. She's my entire world. 8 years old, a delicate spirit with a heart that aches for wilted flowers and ladybugs stranded on the pavement. This talent show. It was all her. She'd been dreaming about this moment for months, begging me to sign the permission slip, practicing every night in her bedroom with a hairbrush for a microphone, singing softly, like the lyrics were made of glass. And if I'm being honest, I wasn't sure she'd go through with it. Crowds make her nervous. Lately, everything seemed to make her nervous. She'd been quieter than usual, tiptoeing through our days like she was afraid to take up space. But here we were. There she was, up on that big wooden stage in her favorite pink cardigan, one she'd bedazzled herself with, way too many sequins, and those old jeans she loved because they made her feel like a star. And there I sat, second row, smack in the middle of this sea of other parents and chattering kids, my heart thundering against my ribs. To my left, Mark sat like a stone sculpture. We've been married nearly a decade now. Once upon a time, he was all charm and warm smiles, but those days felt like fairy tales I'd half forgotten. Over the years, that warmth curdled into something cold and cutting, a blade disguised as a husband. And on my right, of course, was Barbara. She sat there as she always did, back stiff as a board nose, slightly raised, like the very air of the school auditorium was beneath her. She never really sat. She perched, like a hawk waiting to pounce. And that same hawk looked at Sophie now, and let those words slip through her lips like poison. She looks like a stray mutt up there. Her voice barely moved the air, but the impact. It hit me square in the stomach, knocking the wind from my lungs. And then Mark's laugh sliced through the space between us, sharp and mean. She's just like her mother. Useless, he said again, twisting the knife. My fingers, without me even noticing, crumpled the glossy event program into a wrinkled ball. My cheeks burned hot, like I'd been slapped in front of the whole town. My ears buzzed with humiliation. But what made it unbearable wasn't only the words themselves, it was the stage they chose to deliver them on. Right there, surrounded by teachers, other parents, kids. And worst of all, some of them joined in. I caught the awkward grins, the snickers covered behind polite coughs. People wanting to fit in, to be part of the joke, even if the joke was a child. I sat frozen in my chair, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me from all sides. My body screamed to do something, stand up, shout back, anything, but I felt like I'd been superglued to my seat. Why now? Why did it cut so deep tonight? Maybe because somewhere buried under years of silence and compromise, I still feared they were right. Maybe because I'd spent years wondering if I really was useless. I'd shelved my writing dreams long ago, let Mark take control of the finances, the decisions, the very direction of our lives. I convinced myself it was love. But looking at Sophie standing there, still gripping the microphone with her tiny trembling hands, scanning the crowd for me, I knew I couldn't hide behind that lie anymore. And then, in a breath so fragile I almost missed it, Sophie took a step toward the mic stand. But instead of a song, what came out was something far braver. "I want to thank the person who saved me," she said, her voice cutting through the noise, trembling, but clear enough to still the entire auditorium. Time stopped. My breath caught lodged in my throat like a stone. And then, like a scene from someone else's life, Sophie lifted her arm and pointed straight at me. Me, Claire Walker. I didn't even realize I'd started crying until the salty sting brushed the corner of my mouth. Her little finger was still aimed at me, unwavering. Our eyes locked, hers steady and fierce, burning with something I hadn't seen in her for a long time. Courage. Real, unfiltered courage. I sat there paralyzed. The world around me faded like the edges of a photograph blurring out. All that existed in that moment was Sophie and me. Mark shifted beside me, his body suddenly twitchy like he'd been caught in a lie. Barbara crossed her arms, exhaling through her nose like she'd caught a bad smell. But me, I sat there stunned, breathless, the moment pressing down on me with the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. It had been just a week ago, though it felt like a lifetime had quietly unfolded between then and now, when Sophie had approached me in the middle of my usual evening routine, folding yet another endless heap of laundry on the worn floral couch that sagged under the weight of years and compromises. She'd come in softly, padding across the living room carpet with those hesitant, almost apologetic steps that had become second nature to her, as if she feared her very presence might disrupt the fragile balance of our home. She had that look on her face, the one I knew too well, the delicate dance of courage and fear flickering in her wide, thoughtful eyes, her fingers fidgeting with the frayed hem of her oversized t-shirt knuckles white with tension. Her gaze darted between the safety of the carpet and my face, seeking permission before even daring to ask for what her heart wanted. "Mom, if I try out for the talent show, would you come?" Her voice, barely louder than a whisper, was brittle, as if the very question might shatter under its own weight. And in that moment, something inside me cracked, not from anger or frustration, but from the ache of realizing that my daughter had learned to tread so carefully to ask for love like it was a favor. I set the bundle of mismatched socks aside, lowering myself to her level, brushing a stray strand of her chestnut hair behind her ear. "Of course I'll come, Sophie," I told her, my voice trembling with something I couldn't quite name. "You could be juggling tennis balls or reciting the alphabet backwards, and I'd still be your loudest, proudest fan." She smiled, then not the big, uninhibited grin of children who believe the world is theirs, but a small, sideways smirk that tugged at just one corner of her lips, like she was testing the waters of happiness, afraid it might be taken from her if she showed it too freely. That was Sophie's soft, self-effacing, forever cautious about taking up too much space in a room that had never made room for her in the first place. And I knew precisely where she'd learned that. For the past 8 years, it had been the two of us existing in this peculiar limbo of love and survival. Mark might have technically shared the same roof, but emotionally he'd packed his bags and left somewhere between one promotion and the next, vanishing into his spreadsheets and conference calls, leaving behind only his cold echo in the hallways. And Barbara, his mother, well, she'd always seen me as little more than an unwanted guest at her meticulously curated family table. Barbara wasn't even supposed to be at the talent show. I never invited her, but Mark had insisted. It's family, he'd said, his voice carrying that tone that brooked no argument, which I should have ignored. I should have stood my ground. But I didn't. And now the morning of the show arrived like a lead weight pressing against our fragile routine. Sophie sat at the breakfast table, staring down at the plate of banana pancakes I'd made the way she liked them, slightly crisp at the edges, with melted chocolate chips forming gooey constellations across the surface. But she only picked at them, pushing them around with her fork, as if they were obstacles rather than comfort food. I'm scared, Mom, she murmured, her voice thin, trembling against the clatter of silverware against porcelain. I sat beside her, drawing slow, soothing circles into her small back with the palm of my hand. Being scared means you care, sweetheart. And that's never a bad thing, I whispered, trying to lend her a courage I wasn't sure I had left. She looked up at me with those wide, questioning eyes. But what if I mess up? You won't, I said, summoning every ounce of certainty I could muster for her sake. But even if you do, I'll still be there clapping louder than anyone else in the room. I meant it, I meant every word, but the day had other plans. The car ride to the school was suffocating. Barbara commandeered the front passenger seat, complaining about every minor inconvenience she could conjure, from the sluggish morning traffic to how Sophie's carefully chosen outfit looked like something from a thrift store bargain bin. Mark barely offered a word, nodding absently, punctuating the silence only with sighs that felt like accusations. I kept my eyes locked on the road, gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary, because I'd long since learned that arguing with Barbara was an exercise in futility, like shouting into an empty canyon and expecting an echo of understanding. In the back seat, Sophie clung to her handwritten lyric sheet like it was a lifeline, her lips moving in silent rehearsal, the notes shaky, her breath catching in between as if every word was an uphill climb. And now here we were. That same small, trembling girl stood alone on that vast stage, under the merciless glow of the stage lights, and before a room filled with strangers, and worse, the people who'd spent years trying to dim her light. She raised her voice not in song but in defiance. I want to thank the person who saved me. The room froze. I froze. She pointed, directly at me, and I tasted salt before I realized tears had started to spill down my cheeks. Her little finger, outstretched like a beacon in the dark, found me. Her gaze locked with mine, fierce and unwavering, glowing with a bravery that cut through me, exposing every hidden aching part of my soul. And yet, even in that electrifying moment, I could feel Mark's gaze burning into me, not with pride, but with irritation, as if I had somehow stolen something from him, hijacked the spotlight that was never his to begin with. He leaned toward me, his jaw clenched so tightly the tendons pulsed in his neck. "You're making this about you," he hissed through gritted teeth. I blinked, stunned, my flushed face wet with tears, unable to believe what I was hearing. My daughter, our daughter, had just declared me her hero, and still somehow Mark found a way to twist it into something ugly and selfish. I turned away from him. I couldn't look at him anymore. Sophie had started to sing now, her voice trembling, at first delicate and hesitant like a bird testing its wings against a storm. But even so, it was sweet, achingly sweet, the kind of voice that made you lean in closer, not for its power, but for its honesty, for its tenderness. Yet I couldn't lose myself in her voice. Not while Barbara sat beside me, shifting restlessly in her seat, releasing exaggerated sighs, and glancing pointedly at her gleaming gold watch, like she was counting down the seconds until she could escape this embarrassment. "She's pitchy," she sneered under her breath, not even bothering to shield her words this time. I remained silent, my jaw clamped shut so tight the tension vibrated through my ears. Behind us, the same parents who'd chuckled at Mark's vile remarks earlier were whispering again, their words floating like poison darts in the heavy air, awkward, off-key. And suddenly, I wasn't in the auditorium anymore. I was back in our kitchen 4 years ago, reading aloud a short story I'd poured my heart into, trembling with hope, only to watch Mark sip his beer and deliver his verdict with that same indifferent shrug. "It's fine, but who would actually read this kind of stuff?" That same hollow coldness spread through me now. They weren't just mocking Sophie's singing. They were mocking her courage, her vulnerability, her willingness to stand alone in the light and be seen just like they had done to me for years. And I sat there mute. I despised myself for that, for shrinking, for swallowing my outrage, for letting their opinions carve deeper wounds than the truth I already knew, that Sophie was braver, kinder, and more beautiful than any of them could comprehend. My fingers dug into the seat cushion, clutching it like a life raft, as my heart shattered for my daughter. She deserved better than this, better than them. And yet she sang on, and with each verse, something inside her seemed to bloom. Her voice grew steadier. Her small frame straightened. Her hands dropped to her sides, no longer clinging to the mic like a crutch. She wasn't just singing now. She was claiming her space. I scanned the room. The whispers hadn't all disappeared, but some faces, they were listening now. Really listening. A few even smiled. But the battle waged inches from me was far from over. Mark sat rigid, his expression a clenched fist. Barbara tapped on her phone now, no doubt sharing her distaste with whichever sister of hers delighted in cruelty the way she did. And me, I felt something deep inside me begin to smolder a fire I had tried to suppress for years, afraid of the damage it might cause if unleashed. I looked at Sophie standing there under the unforgiving wash of fluorescent stage lights, her silhouette small yet defiant against the towering backdrop of red velvet curtains. She was alone, exposed, yet she stood firm in front of a room that had just heard her, in a voice trembling but unshaken, declare me as the person who saved her. The air around me seemed to hum with an almost electric stillness, and within that charged silence something inside me shifted irrevocably. I could no longer remain a spectator to my own life, no longer afford to sit muted in the face of what had been done to her, and to me. When her final delicate note faded into the auditorium's vast hush, there was a heartbeat of uncertainty, as if the room itself had to recalibrate to the bravery they had just witnessed. Then slowly, almost timidly at first, the applause began, hesitant claps from a few parents scattered in the crowd. And then, like embers catching into flame, the clapping swelled, rippling through the rows of plastic chairs, until entire sections of the audience rose to their feet. I caught sight of a father in the third row nudging his son, murmuring words I could almost hear in the stillness of my heart. "That's what bravery looks like, kiddo." I felt something warm streak down my cheek, but it was no longer the bitter salt of shame or sorrow. This time it was pride, real bone-deep pride. The kind that doesn't parade itself like the hollow gestures Mark was so fond of at cocktail parties, but the kind that rises from your chest and spreads through your limbs, leaving you trembling, because you love someone so fiercely it aches. Beside me, Mark's hands clapped twice. 2 reluctant, robotic claps, a bare minimum gesture executed without conviction. And Barbara, she didn't even bother. Her gaze remained fixed on her phone screen, scrolling as though the world hadn't just cracked open in front of her. Her lips tight and sour, pressed together like she'd bitten into something rotten. But the fire inside me, that old smoldering ember I had kept hidden and cold for years, now flared into a full blaze. I leaned in toward Mark, my voice low and measured, carrying the sharpness of steel wrapped in velvet, the kind of calm that precedes a storm no one sees coming. "She heard you," I whispered close enough that he couldn't mistake the tremor of truth in my tone. "Both of you. She might not grasp every cruel word you spat, but she felt it." He kept his eyes forward, face carved into that familiar mask of indifference, but the stiffness in his posture betrayed him. "Don't start," he muttered through a clenched jaw. But I was done staying silent. My voice, once a fragile thread, grew louder, now weaving itself into something stronger, steadier, unafraid of the eyes that turned toward us. "No, Mark. You started this, years ago. Every time you told her she was too sensitive, every time you called me too soft. It ends here." People were watching now, heads tilted in our direction, the air around us charged with the crackling anticipation of a confrontation long overdue. And for the first time in forever, I welcomed their gaze. Let them witness what it looks like when quiet endurance finally fractures into something powerful. Sophie, meanwhile, had left the stage, returning to the cluster of students near the back, but she turned for a moment, her eyes searching for me. When our gazes collided, something passed between us, something weightier than pride alone. It was relief, a wordless understanding that I wasn't just clapping for her. I was standing up, finally, for both of us. I stood then, driven by a force I couldn't name, my legs moving before my brain caught up. I pushed past Mark and Barbara, past the murmuring crowd, past the lingering sneers and hushed whispers, down the aisle toward the backstage door. A school volunteer, young, nervous, armed with a clipboard and a badge, stepped into my path. "Ma'am, I'm sorry parents aren't allowed backstage right now," she offered with forced gentleness. But I didn't stop. I met her gaze squarely steady and said the only thing that mattered. "I need to tell my daughter something." She paused, searching my face, and something in my expression must have told her not to argue. She stepped aside. Backstage was a mess of wires, folding chairs, and nervous kids in costumes. I found Sophie sitting cross-legged on the scuffed linoleum floor, clutching a dented water bottle, her cheeks flushed from the afterglow of performance. She looked up at me with those wide eyes, vulnerable but curious. "Was I okay, Mom?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I knelt down beside her, cupping her face gently in my palms. You were more than okay, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. You were brave, Sophie. You were honest. And I heard every single word. Her face broke into that kind of smile only children know how to give, the kind that splits their whole face, unfiltered, unapologetic joy. I pulled her into me, wrapping her small body tightly in my arms, feeling her warmth seep into the hollow spaces I hadn't even known were empty. I've been quiet for too long, I murmured into her hair, breathing in the scent of her, a mixture of kid shampoo and sweat. But not anymore. I promise you, Sophie, I will never let anyone make you feel small again, especially not in our own family. She clung to me, her small arms tightening around my neck, and for the first time in years I wasn't merely enduring. I was choosing. I didn't return to my seat after that. I couldn't. I stood along the far wall of the auditorium, half hidden behind a line of unused folding chairs, watching from the shadows. From where I stood, I could still see them, Mark checking his watch, as if his life were too important for this, and Barbara filing her nails like nothing of significance had just unfolded before her. Like their granddaughter hadn't bared her soul on that stage. And it struck me hard and unforgiving, they weren't just dismissive. They were willfully blind to anything that didn't conform to their rigid, suffocating standards. And for all these years, I had been contorting myself to fit their misshapen mold, shrinking, silencing, sanding down my edges to avoid upsetting their delicate egos. Not out of love, but out of survival. Not anymore. As the principal took the stage to offer closing remarks, I stepped back into the aisles, but I didn't sit. I remained standing, my gaze locked on Mark and Barbara, daring them to look away, daring them to pretend they hadn't seen what everyone else in this room had witnessed. When the assembly ended, and the crowd erupted into the familiar chaos of backpacks, zipping children, shouting parents, gushing over their little stars, I moved through the throng like I was wading through water, slow, deliberate, untouchable. I found Sophie outside her classroom, where the teachers were releasing the kids to their parents. She ran to me, slipping her small, slightly sweaty hand into mine, her grip tight, mine even tighter. And then I saw Mark approaching, his gait stiff, purposeful, with Barbara trailing behind him like some regal figure disgusted to find herself among commoners. Mark looked at me then, the way someone might look at a loose thread on a favorite suit jacket, torn between the urge to snip it off quickly and the fear of unraveling the whole thing. His expression was tight flat, as he finally broke the heavy silence with his usual brand of empty authority. We should head out, he said, his voice as lifeless as the expression on his face. Traffic's going to be hell. But something inside me had already shifted, cracked open in that auditorium, and there was no sealing it shut again. I glanced down at Sophie, whose small hand clung to mine like a tether, then back up at him, locking eyes with a calm I hadn't known I possessed. No, I replied simply, yet the word carried more weight than all the lectures Mark had hurled at me over the years combined. You two can go. Sophie and I are staying. Barbara let out an exaggerated scoff, her perfectly lined lips curling as if the mere scent of rebellion disgusted her. Oh, Claire, don't be dramatic, she sneered in that tone she used when she wanted to diminish me into something fragile and laughable. But for the first time in a decade, I met her gaze without flinching. I turned to her, my voice steady and sharp enough to slice through the layers of her practiced condescension. You called my daughter a stray dog. You humiliated her in front of strangers. In front of me. You don't get to tell me what's dramatic anymore. Mark's face hardened, his mouth tightening into that familiar clenched line. You're making a scene, he hissed through gritted teeth, though I could see the panic flickering in his eyes, that same fear bullies feel when they realize their prey is no longer afraid. No, Mark, I said, my tone calm, measured, unwavering. I'm making a boundary. The words tasted powerful on my tongue, like something sacred, something I'd been holding hostage inside me for far too long. You both crossed a line today, and I let you for too many years. But it ends here. Sophie looked up at me, eyes wide and brimming with uncertainty. Are we okay, Mom? I knelt beside her, brushing a curl away from her flushed cheek. We're better than okay, I whispered, my voice thick with something closer to freedom than I'd felt in years. You showed me what courage looks like, Sophie. Now it's my turn. I rose, standing taller than I had in a decade, and locked eyes with Mark, unblinking, unyielding. If protecting my daughter makes me dramatic, so be it. I'd rather be dramatic than disappear. And for once, Mark, always so quick with his snide quips and biting remarks, stood there, silent lips parted as though a rebuttal hovered there, but no sound came out. Good. Without another word, I turned my back on them, Sophie's small, warm hand still tangled in mine, and together we walked away out the heavy auditorium doors, not toward the car, but toward the small park across the street. There, beneath the crooked arms of an old oak tree, we sat on a worn bench sharing a dripping, too-sweet ice cream cone from a nearby vendor. Sophie giggled when it dribbled onto her shirt, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, I didn't care about the mess. That day ended not with applause or trophies, but with something far more powerful: truth. And in the 4 months that followed that night, that truth quietly unfolded inside me, threading itself through every part of my life in ways that weren't flashy or dramatic, but steady and transformative, like a river reshaping its banks over time. I began journaling again. Nothing glamorous, just battered spiral notebooks and dollar store pens. But each night, once Sophie had drifted to sleep, I sat alone at the kitchen table letting the words spill out. Some nights they came in torrents, others in reluctant trickles. But each line felt like reclaiming a part of myself I'd long thought lost. I also started therapy. Alone. Once a week. At first I couldn't even admit it aloud, not even to myself. But now that hour became sacred, a space where I was allowed to feel without apology, to finally name the burdens I'd carried in silence, the guilt, the loneliness, the buried rage, and the love. So much love. Sophie changed too, in ways that filled me with awe. That moment on stage had lit a spark inside her I hadn't realized was flickering on the edge of going out. She sang louder, now laughed with her whole body. Just last week she asked me if we could make music together, and for the first time in years, I dug my old college keyboard out from under the bed, brushing off the dust of neglect. We played for an hour, clumsy and off-key, but gloriously alive. As for Mark, we still shared a house for now, but the air between us had shifted, grown sharper, filled with invisible walls I'd finally built brick by brick. I stopped apologizing for speaking. I started making decisions that belonged to me and me alone. I opened a savings account in my own name. I applied for part-time work at a cozy, book-scented local bookstore. I even emailed an old friend from my writing workshop days. She replied within 5 minutes. "Where have you been? Let's catch up." And Barbara, I hadn't seen her since the night of the talent show. She tried calling once, left a syrupy voicemail, pretending nothing had happened, as if she could rewrite history with a cheerful tone. I never called her back. I don't think I ever will. Sometimes silence is the boundary, and honestly, it feels like the most peaceful one I've ever drawn. For the first time in years, I no longer woke up waiting for the next blow to fall, no longer twisted myself into someone smaller, just to keep the fragile illusion of peace. I stopped trying to prove my worth to people committed to misunderstanding me. Instead, I began building something entirely different, something for Sophie and for me. We created a new ritual. Every Friday night, we slipped into our pajamas, made messy, too-sweet hot chocolate, and curled up on the couch under a blanket that was comically too big for the two of us. And before the movie started, I always asked her one question. "What's something brave you did this week?" Last Friday, she beamed and said I told a boy at school to stop making fun of my glasses. I smiled, heart swelling with pride. That's my girl. She grinned back, her voice a quiet whisper full of something that sounded a lot like hope. "You helped me learn how." And in that moment, I realized something simple and profound. Sometimes being a mother isn't about knowing all the answers. Sometimes it's about standing tall when your child looks up so they know what strength looks like. So now, as I sit here beneath the hush of a house that for once feels like a home and not a cage, with Sophie tucked safely into bed, and the night wrapping around me like a soft, forgiving blanket, I find myself thinking of every woman who's ever been made to feel like she was too much. Too soft, too loud, too quiet, too fragile, too anything. I think of all of us who've been told to shrink, to swallow our feelings, to smile, even when our hearts were breaking, to accept less than we deserved, because someone else decided what we were worth. And to those women, whether you're a stranger reading these words in the quiet corners of the internet, or someone sitting right there in the same suffocating seat I once occupied, I see you. I see the invisible weight you carry, the way you tuck away your dreams like worn out sweaters in the back of a closet, the way you convince yourself that survival is enough. And if no one has ever dared to whisper it into the stillness of your ache, let me be the first. Your softness, it is not weakness. It is not something to be hardened or erased or disguised behind brittle armor. It is your superpower. The world needs your softness like it needs air. It needs your tenderness, your empathy, your voice. The voice I almost lost, until Sophie, my own child, handed it back to me in the most unexpected, humbling way on a stage, under the harshness of lights in front of people who never clapped for us. She found her voice, yes, but she also gave me mine. And now that I have it back, I will use it. If my story stirred something inside you, if it cracked open a door you'd bolted shut, or reminded you of someone who once stood for you when the world seemed against you, I ask only this: share it. Pass it along to someone who might need to hear it, someone still lost in their own shadows. Tell me your stories if you're willing. Leave them in the spaces where others can find them like little lanterns in the dark. Tell me about the person who saved you, or maybe the person you're saving now. I will read every word and I will hold them gently. Until next time, stay soft, stay strong, and never ever forget the truth I almost forgot. You don't have to vanish to be loved.